Hello chess lovers, welcome back to my channel. Today we are looking at round 8 of the Tata Steel tournament in Wijk aan Zee. Nodirbek Abdusattorov is leading the field and he is undefeated until this game. On the other side, Anish Giri. Giri started the tournament slowly, but he is the king of preparation. Today he is playing with the black pieces. Let us dive straight into this theoretical firestorm. Abdusattorov opened the game with pawn to d4. The answer from black is knight to f6. We have pawn to c4, pawn to e6, knight to c3 by white, bishop to b4 by black. White invites Giri to the Nimzo Indian, but he is looking for something else. Knight to f3 by white, pawn to d5 by Anish Giri. We have transposed into the Ragozin variation of the Queen's Gambit declined. This variation is highly dynamic and is often played in Grandmaster chess. White captures with the c-pawn on d5. Black recaptures with the e-pawn. Bishop to f4 by white. Knight to e4. Giri immediately puts pressure on c3. He isn't here for a draw. We have rook to c1. Knight to c6 by black. Knight to d2 by white, and now we have g5 by black. Pawn to g5 is a perfectly playable move and was certainly analyzed and prepared for this tournament by Giri. He is kicking now the white bishop and preparing a kingside expansion. The white bishop moves to e3. The black knight captures on c3, the b-pawn captures on c3, and the black bishop moves to a3. Rook to b1 by white. Now we have pawn to f5 by black. Giri plays a courageous game. At first pawn to g5, now pawn to f5. He is threatening pawn to f4 to trap the bishop on e3. The answer from white is pawn to g3. Bishop to d6 by black. Knight to f3 now. We have pawn to f4 by black. Giri keeps pushing. He is asking Abdusattorov, how are you going to develop your kingside? Bishop to c1 and black castles kingside. Despite the aggressive pawn pushes, black's position is solid. Maybe you cannot believe it, but the chances are completely equal. We have rook to b5 and Giri moves the pawn to g4. White knight to h4. And knight to e7 by black. The knight moves back to defend d5. White has a space advantage on the queen side, but the black pawns on the king's side are a constant threat. e3 by white now. c6 by black. The white rook retreats to b2. Pawn to f3. Look at that pawn. It restricts the entire kingside development for Abdusattorov. h3 now. And pawn to b5 by black. With the move pawn to b5, Anish Giri leaves the well-known theory of the Ragozin variation. And this move is a good move, because it prevents white from improving his position with pawn c4. Now we have queen to d3 by white. That is not the best move. Better was to play bishop to d3 or pawn to a4. We have rook to f7 and king to d1. Abdusattorov realizes that his king is not safe on the king side, so he walks to the center queen side. Rook to b8 by black. White captures on g4 and black retakes with the bishop. Bishop to h3 by white. Abdusattorov is following a plan what is not really good. Giri now has a noticeable advantage with the black pieces, and he captures with his bishop on h3. White rook captures on h3. Giri plays queen to d7. The rook retreats to h1. Queen to g4 by black. White moves his king to c2. And black plays bishop to a3. Rook to b3. Black's bishop captures on c1. And white's king recaptures. Knight to c8 now. This knight move back to the back rank shows why Giri exchanged the bishops on c1. The black knight now wants to reach white's position via the square d6. We have queen to f1 by white, king to g7, and queen to d1 by white. h5 now by black. This move prevents white from using the knight g2 trick to bring this dead knight back into the game, because now the black pawn on h5 protects his queen. Abdusattorov now plays pawn to e4. White is trying to free himself from his cramped position by sacrificing pawns. But what else can he do? Black captures with his d-pawn on e4. d5 by white. White is in a desperate situation. Queen to g5 with check. White king to b1. And the black queen captures the pawn on d5. The best move for black is to play pawn to c5. But to capture the d-pawn with the queen is also winning. Black is now up 2 pawns and has a significant advantage. Abdusattorov plays now pawn to c4. The black queen captures on d1. And white recaptures with the rook. The queens have now disappeared from the board and black has a winning endgame. Knight to b6 by black. White captures on b5 with his pawn. We have knight to a4 by black. Giri is threatening a fork on c3. We have rook d4 by white. Knight to c5 by black. Rook c3 by white. And Giri captures with his rook on b5 with check. Abdusattorov could have resigned here, as black's advantage was overwhelming. But who likes to lose like that? Let's be honest, Abdusattorov was completely outmatched throughout the entire game. We have king to c2 by white, rook from f to b7 by black, rook from c3 to c4 by white, and black moves his king to f6. Giri brings his king to the final battle. We have king to c3 by white, rook to b1 by black, rook to d2 by white. The black rook gives a check on c1. White rook moves to c2. Black captures on c2. The white king recaptures. And now we have rook to b5 by black. With the exchange of rooks, Giri has simplified the position because he is up 2 pawns that should win. King to c3 by white. King e5 by black. White knight give a check on g6. King to d6 by black. King d4 by white. Black moves his rook to b2. Black's rook is now attacking the f2 pawn and the a2 pawn. But he had another idea. If white captures the knight on c5 with his rook, Abdusattorov plays that desperate move, trying to create a draw by trading material. But now the black rook comes to b4 with check. Giri's killer move. If the white king moves, Giri can capture the rook on c5 with his king. And if Abdusattorov plays rook to c4, he is also lost. We will see. And now we have pawn to c5 with check. King to c3 by white. And now we have the next killer move, pawn to e3. Giri finds the breakthrough. The pawn on e3 cannot be stopped. The white rook moves to h4 and Giri moves his rook to b1. Abdusattorov resigns here because he cannot stop the black pawns. For example, if he would capture with his pawn on f3, f2, rook to f4 by white, black pawn promotes on f1 to a queen, white rook captures on f1, and the black rook recaptures. What a phenomenal game! Anish Giri neutralized the tournament leader with a double pawn push. With his pawn sacrifices, Abdusattorov tried to get counterplay. But Giri converted in the endgame his material advantage with precision. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. And if you want to stay updated on all the drama from the world of chess, follow my channel please. I would like to see you in the next video. Goodbye friends.